Boa noite, pessoal, tudo bem? Obrigada pela paciência, a gente teve um atraso porque a gente estava ajustando o som. A palestra de agora, ela foi gravada pelo professor Michael Kramp, dos Estados Unidos, né? Por questões de fuso horário e por ser em outra língua, a gente optou para fazer essa gravação e a nossa equipe da Jane Austen Brasil fez a legenda. E aí a gente vai passar esse vídeo para vocês agora, essa palestra. O professor Michael Kramp é pesquisador de literatura britânica do século XIX. Atualmente desenvolve um projeto de longo prazo chamado Jane Austen, The Future of the Humanities, concebido para utilizar a obra de Austen como meio de evidenciar a importância das humanidades para públicos diversos. O projeto inclui um podcast, um documentário e uma monografia voltada ao público geral. Ele é autor de Patriarchy's Creative Resilience e Disciplining Love, Austen and the Modern Man, além de editor de Jane Austen Masculinity e Jane Austen The Critical Theory. E a palestra dele é intitulada Jane Austen, Diálogos Difíceis e a Necessidade de um Discurso Civilizado. Né? E a professora Adriana Salles também dialoga com ele, então a gente vai transmitir o vídeo e no final a gente tenta responder as perguntas. Tudo bem?
Hi guys, we are here to listen to the research from Professor Dr. Michael Kramp from Lehigh University. He's going to talk about Jane Austen, difficult dialogues and the need for civil discourse. And I'd like to thank you very much, Michael, to being part of this seminar, Brazilian from north and south of Brazil, celebrating Jane Austen. Guys, I'm going to introduce him to you. Michael Kramp is a scholar of 19th century British literature, critical theory, and masculinity studies. He is currently engaged with a multi-year project, Jane Austen and the Future of Humanities, designed to leverage Austen's work to showcase the importance of the humanities to diverse public audiences. This project involves a podcast, a documentary film, and a public-facing monograph. He is the author of Patriarchy's Creative Resilience, Disciplining Love and Austen and the Modern Man. Also the editor of Jane Austen Masculinity and Jane Austen and Critical Theory. He has co-edited the first scholarly edition of William Delisle Hayes' The Dawn of the Great City for the West Virginia University Press. And now I would like to ask you if you wanted to say something, and thank you very much for you talking to us this, even though it's previously recorded, right? So the stage is yours, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. It's really a pleasure to be here. Excited to speak to you in Brazil. Excited. I'm coming to Brazil in March, and I'm really excited to speak to more people when I make my visit to Brazil and learn more about how Jane Austen is operating within Brazilian culture. Really excited to make that trip. Excited to talk to you here today about Austen and difficult dialogues, and what I see as the sort of need for civil discourse that is becoming more and more urgent in our cultures around the world as political extremism and extremist thought and has become more and more popular and more pressing. I'm going to do a couple different things today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the project on which I'm working. I'm going to try to show you some videos of the interviews that I've been doing around the world, talking to different people and thinking through different ideas with people. And specifically thinking about how Jane Austen, as a writer and a thinker, can really help us to understand the ongoing importance and really the urgency of the humanities in our world today. And finally, I want to give us one specific example, and that is this idea of civil discourse, of how Austen can really help us to think about models of civil discourse in new and interesting and creative ways. So that's my plan for today. I want to start by just thinking about the work that I'm doing, which is a project I call Jane Austen and the Future of the Humanities, which is a public-facing, multi-year project in which I'm really trying to shift from sort of a traditional academic scholar to doing public-facing work around the world, working with people to create what I think of as a public website repository of work on Jane Austen that's massively accessible, free, open to the public, where I'm trying to engage in various kinds of media. I'm doing a podcast right now. I have an active YouTube page with ongoing film work, and where I'm collecting interviews with Austen scholars, Austen writers, Austen creatives, Austen fans and enthusiasts. I'm writing a public-facing monograph, and I'd love to create an edited collection with people who are working with Austen in all kinds of ways. And the primary goal is to think about how Austen is allowing us to reach diverse public communities to think about the value of the humanities in our lives. I have a couple of core premises that I've tried to follow in this work. And that, maybe first and foremost, I really fundamentally believe that there is great value in the humanities and great value in the humanities globally. I certainly recognize that the humanities are in great trouble and great uncertainty around the world. I do really believe that Jane Austen is a distinct resource, a distinct cultural resource. I think she has great versatility, is used in all kinds of ways. I think she's massively accessible, has global popularity, global authority, global respect. And I think it's really important to emphasize that Jane Austen is a figure who is not threatening to people. No, people aren't calling up school boards and asking us or demanding that we stop teaching Jane Austen. I mean, Jane Austen is somebody who's deemed safe. And I think that's really important, especially when we think about civil discourse and political extremism. Jane Austen is not somebody who really angers people. And finally, I think it's important to emphasize that, nobody owns Austen and nobody owns the humanities. And I think that that's an important method for me as I think about how I do this work and try to listen to as many people as possible. About civil discourse and political extremism. Jane Austen is not somebody who really angers people. And finally, I think it's important to emphasize that, nobody owns Austen and nobody owns the humanities. And I think that that's an important method for me as I think about how I do this work and try to listen to as many people as possible. Some of my key methodologies. I really want to leverage Jane Austen. I don't think that she is sacred. I don't think Austen is some sort of elite angelic figure. I really want to leverage Austen. I think she can be a tool for how we talk about the humanities, how we think about ideas. I want to talk to as many people as possible. I'm not interested in only talking to the famous people. I think, all kinds of people use Austen to get into public communities and communicate really important ideas. And I want to be able to sort of think about that with them. To that extent, I really maintain a judgment-free zone. And I maintain the long game. Like, I'm not in a rush. I don't want to work with deadlines. Because I do public-facing work, I really rely on the kindness of others. And so, to that extent, I don't rush people. I don't pressure people. I don't want to work with deadlines. And I really want to privilege accessibility. I want this work to be available and open to as many people as possible. And to that end, I try to use different kinds of media. I try to use podcasts and video and public work, and I try to appear in blogs, and I try to do video lectures, and I try to speak in different places to try to make the work as available as possible. A few lessons so far. Here I am in Mexico City at a sort of a release for a new Spanish language edition of Pride and Prejudice. A few lessons so far from my work as I've traveled around the world this past year. This great 250th anniversary of Austen's birth. It's been so much fun. It's been really interesting to think how colleges and universities don't own the humanities. We've had massive success with the humanities in different public spaces, and yet we don't use the term the humanities really outside of colleges and universities. It's not a term that it's not a term that we hear, for example, down at Barnes and Noble, or that we hear in museums, or that we hear in churches. People aren't talking about the humanities when they go to a book club. The humanities are alive and well in all those public spaces, but we're using different terms. And we're engaging the humanities in different ways and in different methods. I do think it's really interesting that the humanities are quite alive, quite active. I think it's fascinating that Austen's popularity is alive and well and healthier than it's ever been, and more global and more versatile than certainly I knew before I started this project. More diverse. We have people doing more things with Austen than we realized. I've been blown away and so grateful for the generosity that people have shown me on this project around the world. Been welcomed into people's home. People have given up their time to talk with me. And I really want to emphasize the gratitude that I have for that project. So I want to talk about a couple of key ideas here and show you a couple of the videos that I've taken. All my videos are available on my YouTube page, Jane Austen and the Future of the Humanities, and I'll show you the links to those here at the end. But one of the first things I did on this project is I went down and I spoke to the outgoing director of the National Humanities Center here in the United States. And I wanted to talk with him a little bit about what the humanities were, how we could identify them. And it was really interesting to me that Dr. Robert Newman, who's longtime president of the National Humanities Center, didn't want to talk about disciplines. He wanted to talk about methodologies. And I found his language very helpful. So here's Dr. Robert Newman.
So I like to think of humanities having sort of two essential methodologies. One of which is interrogation. So we in the humanities are kind of, how should I say this? Kind of the teenagers of everyday life. We're not comfortable with things. We're always asking why. We're kinds of the pains in the ass of society, because we're not happy with the status quo at all. We're always asking, how can we do things better? Or how can we do things differently? Or what's lacking in this kind of status quo? So interrogation, questioning, is so fundamental to all methodologies behind the humanities. The other is bridging. So what we do in the humanities often is connect things that were previously disparate, that were previously unconnected. We find creative ways of making those connections. And I think those two kind of fundamental methodologies aid us substantially in solving problems.
So I'm really interested in thinking about, the humanities, not so much as a set of disciplines, but again, as Dr. Newman suggests here, as these set of methodologies, because I think that opens up this idea of tools, again, of leveraging, right? When we talk about the humanities, we tend to think about books and texts and maybe disciplines. I want to think about methodologies, things we actively do, things we experience, right? When we talk about Austen, we tend to think about, again, books, legends, right? Stories, right? I want to think about versatility, accessibility, and safety, right? That these are sort of things that make Austen this distinctive cultural resource. I went and talked to Dr. Patricia A. Matthew, great colleague and professor at Montclair State University, great scholar of race and Regency. And she did a great job in her interview of talking about Austen's malleability, Austen's versatility. So here's Patricia Matthew.
I think the thing that's wonderful about her is that she's incredibly malleable. I'm going to forget the list of names. I started just thinking of all of the people who are not what you would think of when you think of an Austen fan, I think, or an Austen one who's going to adapt Austen. You might think of a middle class white woman. And there's queer Austen, and there's Asian Austen, and there's South Asian Austen, and there's Black Austen, and there's Caribbean Austen. I mean, that the fact that everyone sees those novels and understands, whether it's in the structure or the narrative arc or the relationships or the themes, they really see themselves. And not just women, right? That so many people see themselves speaks to, and I think as professors, we don't like to think of things as timeless, right? We want nuance and we worry if our students see things as too relatable. But I think she actually is. And I think that there's this push and this desire for storytellers in particular to see how they can retell those stories through their own particular identity lens. And I think that is why she's more interesting. It's not the fact that she's canonical. It's the fact that you don't have to you don't have to pitch on Austen. I can't tell you how many students I have who take some of my classes. And in 2023, 2021, 2019, I taught that Austen seminar because they thought, oh, in order to understand the world, I have to read Austen.
I mean, this is so key and so important to my project, right? That Austen remains this malleable, versatile, accessible resource around the world in so many cultures, right? And I love the way Dr. Matthew talks in this interview about how students feel as though they want, but really they need to study Austen in order to understand the world. And they have access to that because Austen is so malleable, so versatile, and so accessible, right? Again, part of the key ways in which Austen becomes this dynamic but really distinctive cultural resource that allows us to think about the value of the humanities. One more sort of key tenet here, and that is Nikki Payne, who talks about the safe bones of Jane Austen, right? And so this is Nikki Payne, where she discusses with me how Austen's stories provide this sort of safe bones or safe architecture, safe structure for a story that she can use.
Part of the reason why I love retelling Jane Austen is that I think Jane Austen occupies this space, right, in the white imaginary. It's this kind of safe story, right? It's this story that everyone kind of knows the bones to. And when you're retelling a story like that, and you put these issues of gentrification, issues of generational like back and forth between like mothers and parents, and you know, who's a matriarch and who's a patriarch, and all of this like transracial adoption, all of these broad like these stories that publishing has told us over and over are niche, and that certain types of people will like this, but not everybody. So they bring Black stories or Asian stories or trans stories into this place in the niche, and then the white stories get to be universal. And so by like building out this story with Jane Austen as a vehicle, it's this kind of small way to also say like, boom, gotcha, dummies. You read a Black story, you know what I mean? But it's like this Trojan horse that you're able to actually see this universal story in what publishing and society has told you is a niche experience.
So I want to sort of take a moment and sort of pause here and think about what I'm trying to do then with my project, right? I'm trying to think about what I call humanities experiences. And I think Austen allows us to do this because, again, she's versatile, she's accessible, and she's safe, right? She doesn't scare too many people. She allows us to reach lots of people, and you don't need massive amounts of training to study Austen, to read Austen, to enjoy Austen, right? And so those sort of dynamics allow me and allow all of us to sort of think about how Austen can invite us to talk about the value of the humanities in different kinds of ways. And I want to talk about experiences. I want to talk about humanities experiences. I want to get away from skills and methods and outcomes, these kinds of educational assessment terms that we often use in universities, and think instead about transferable, sustainable, and adaptable ideas that we take with us throughout our lives, right? So for example, I talk about Sense and Sensibility and the messiness of human experience. And if we can understand how human relations are messy, right, that we can learn to kind of adapt and adjust to different situations. Today, I want to talk to you about how Pride and Prejudice helps us think about the need for civil discourse. And I'm going to sort of read to you a little bit here as we think about how civil discourse becomes so important, okay? When we study the humanities, we study cultural, global, and personal changes and the relations between all of these. We learn that such changes are neither one-off phenomena nor isolated to specific spaces or individuals. And perhaps most importantly and most obviously, we learn that change is hard and transformative and disruptive and generative. It's not easy to evolve or adapt or learn new ideas. It's challenging to talk with others about such changing or new realities. It's very hard to welcome different opinions, alter our thinking or behavior, or change our ingrained ideas. As change is a fundamental feature of our human experience, it should not surprise us that so many of our great stories center around ideas of transition. So I don't think we should be surprised that Pride and Prejudice, one of the most beloved novels in the English language, is rooted in the concept of change. From the very beginning, with the announcement that Netherfield is now taken at last, and the reminder that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Change has happened in this novel, and more change is coming. When I broached this idea of change in Pride and Prejudice with my own former university teacher, Dr. Claudia L. Johnson, who first introduced me to Austen, she spoke specifically about the processes and difficulties of changing one's mind.
The novel is about change, but the change that I'm most, I should say, impressed with is that it's a novel about people who change their minds. And it was Tony Tanner who first described the novel as a story of a girl who learned to change her mind. And I think he's wrong about saying that she's the only one in the novel who changes, her mind. But I think that he was right on in saying that this is something really stunning. And he has this description of, in his discussion, to say how all of society is structured to keep us from changing our mind. He says, for the most part, people are as fixed and repetitive as the linked routines and established social rituals which dominate their lives. Society secures its own continuity and minimizes the possibility of anything approaching violent change. In such a world, he continues, a change of mind, an act by which consciousness demonstrates some independence from the patterns of thought which have predetermined its readings of things, can come to be a momentous event. So, and this again, is sort of why Austen, is considered so great. To write a novel about a change of mind, about people who come to admit that they were wrong. And to make that so interesting, and it is a momentous event. It's a social event.
In Pride and Prejudice, we can certainly identify the kinds of social rigidity to which Claudia alludes, and we also witness characters engaging in dialogues, compelling conversations that result in fundamental changes in thought or action or belief. When characters engage in difficult dialogues with others, they learn often painful lessons about themselves and others, about their own communities and the complexities of other communities, often communities undergoing significant change. Indeed, one of the recurring features that undergirds and informs change and all that it brings or could bring in Pride and Prejudice is the very possibility of civil discourse and discussion with others. Characters in Pride and Prejudice enter into a series of difficult dialogues, not all of which are successful or end well. In the humanities, when we engage in dialogues about change, we almost always end up talking with others. We learn that not everyone experiences changes in the same ways or at the same time or to the same extent. When we study literatures and languages from various cultures, we develop an understanding of how different individuals and communities narrate their strategies for adapting to changing realities or enduring changing situations. These are never easy or simple stories or processes. And these are processes in which many, many people have most assuredly failed to engage successfully in recent years, as our cultures have become increasingly divided, even extremist, and resistant to practices of civil discourse. We have most assuredly become hesitant to hear or appreciate different ideas, most especially ideas that could invite us or even force us to change how we think. I don't think it is at all a coincidence that this escalating political extremism coincides with the decline of the status of the humanities in colleges and universities. We are quite simply no longer learning to practice and value civil discourse, a fundamental feature of humanistic education. We struggle mightily to listen to each other and often actively prefer to surround ourselves with people and communities who repeat what we already think or believe, instead of allowing differences that could generate even the possibility of modifying how or what we think. All too often, we cling to the kinds of inflexibility that, as Tony Tanner notes, promote social, intellectual, and personal rigidity. When I spoke to Dr. Ruth Wilson, author of the Jane Austen Remedy, about Pride and Prejudice, she, completely unprompted, shared ideas with me about the very ideal of civil discourse. As we sat in her sun-filled home in Sydney, Ruth reflected upon the wars and devastations and tragedies that she had witnessed throughout her life, and pointed to the monumental loss of open, public, and civil discourse, which she identified as an enduring lesson of Austen's fiction. And before I play Ruth's interview here, in which she talks about civil discourse, let me just say, if the audience here doesn't know Ruth Wilson, Dr. Ruth Wilson's a fascinating figure. She is now 93 years old and finished her doctoral degree at the University of Sydney in Australia at the age of 88, and then went on to publish her dissertation as a book, which is a great book called The Jane Austen Remedy, which is sort of semi-autobiographical treatment of her life with Jane Austen. So here's Dr. Wilson talking about civil discourse.
I am so distressed by what is happening politically in the world. I so much feel that this is just an abrupt disruption to everything that I thought we could take for granted. I'm really finding the whole idea of globalization, the whole idea of monetization, the whole idea of a return to a form almost of fascism that we're not even questioning in our liberal democracies. And, you know, I have to say that about your country too. I just feel that I see this man and I think it's actually not Hitler, it's Mussolini. I mean, it's a whole different, I've got that historical perspective, which may not be academic, but it's experiential. I've really lived through a lot. I mean, I remember as a little girl dreaming, having nightmares about Hitler and Mussolini, and now it's sort of all back again, it seems. There are these extraordinary figures that are interfering with all this beautiful tranquility and stability that we felt we had. So, yes, now I think Jane Austen, to read Jane Austen now and to see that you can look at everything in Jane Austen through a 21st century lens, you can do that. You can look and you can see, yes, she is teaching you that some sort of balance is going to be the most important way of dealing with where we are now. Some sort of return to the idea of what it is to have civil discourse. I mean, basically, her conversations are the very fundamental training for how you have civil discourse, where you, particularly the sort of self-conversations and self-reflection that Elizabeth Bennet has with herself after she reads Darcy's letter, and she sees that everything that she has said, which has been witty and it's been funny and everyone's laughed, but in fact, she has not paid proper attention.
As we know, Austen shows us throughout Pride and Prejudice numerous examples of difficult dialogues, hard conversations in which characters express difficult ideas. Not all of these conversations demonstrate what we might deem or Ruth might consider models of politeness, and I don't think we should confuse polite conversation with civil discourse. Some of the examples we consider here today might appear sharp or divisive or even rude, and yet Austen still shows us people engaging in these difficult dialogues, attempting to work through changing realities, trying to process new experiences. I want to emphasize that this work is quite simply fundamental to the work of the humanities. This is what we do. We don't always succeed, and as we have previously discussed, we even anger plenty of people along the way, but we engage in tough conversations with various people that involve change, difference, and emerging possibilities. At times, we even talk about harsh and discomforting realities, like the tragedies of history or the fascist tendencies of the present, which Ruth mentioned. In Pride and Prejudice, Austen models for us how we might participate in difficult dialogues with civility. Let's think about a few very brief and famous examples in which Elizabeth participates in challenging conversations. First, with a rather odd assemblage of dinner guests at Rosings upon first meeting Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She engages in a memorable dialogue about which Austen writes, Elizabeth felt all the impertinence of her questions. But answered them very composedly. As Lady Catherine grills her on her family and her education, she responds with a fair bit of civility. When Lady Catherine expresses shock at the Bennet daughters' lack of a governess, no governess, how is that possible? Without a governess, you must have been neglected. The heroine answers, compared with some families, I believe we were, but such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. When Lady Catherine voices her surprise or concern that all 5 of the Bennet sisters are out at once and adds, very odd, the younger ones out before the elder are married. Elizabeth acknowledges the fact and shares, but really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon the younger sisters that they should not have their share of society and amusement, because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early. I think my understanding of this dialogue and so many others in the novel may have been influenced by popular filmic adaptations of the novel in which we see actors verbally spar with each other, and there is no doubt a bit of sharpness to this exchange. Lady Catherine is rather aggressive, and Elizabeth is just so smart, but I think it's also so very important to emphasize how Elizabeth hears and responds to Lady Catherine de Bourgh. And Lady Catherine de Bourgh asks some tough questions that certainly reveal how her class position informed her entrenched thinking. Indeed, immediately prior to this discussion, Mr. Collins attempts to reassure the heroine by noting that Lady Catherine will not think the worse of you for being simply dressed. She likes to have the distinction of rank preserved. Lady Catherine most assuredly affirms class distinctions and the social class identities that are shifting elsewhere in the novel. Elizabeth could take great offense to the ways in which Darcy's wealthy aunt interrogates her. The heroine could shut down, refuse to speak, or refute public queries with the same tone modeled by her host, but she doesn't. She stays in the conversation, she holds her own, she answers questions, and she expresses her own ideas and opinions. This is not easy. Much later in the novel, when Lady Catherine makes a surprise visit to Longbourn with the expressed intent of ensuring that the report of an engagement between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet be universally contradicted, Elizabeth again engages in a tough conversation with Darcy's wealthy aunt, a much tougher conversation. Lady Catherine does not initiate the dialogue with much civility, famously calling the heroine an obstinate, headstrong girl and instructing her to hear me in silence, but Elizabeth is neither intimidated nor silenced. When addressing the gossip referenced by Lady Catherine, Elizabeth eloquently explains, your coming to Longbourn to see me and my family will be rather a confirmation of it, if indeed such a report is in existence. Again, Elizabeth Bennet is so witty and so sharp, but she's also, of course, right, and she's clear and precise. Likewise, after Lady Catherine announces that the match to which Elizabeth ostensibly has the presumption to aspire can never take place because her daughter is engaged to Mr. Darcy, Elizabeth responds that if he is so, you can have no reason to suppose he will make an offer to me. And finally, when Lady Catherine instructs the heroine that if you were sensible of your own good, you would not wish to quit the sphere in which you have been brought up, Elizabeth answers, in marrying your nephew, I should not consider myself as quitting that sphere. He is a gentleman. I am a gentleman's daughter. This is a tough conversation, and we may not want to think of this as a model for any kind of civil discourse, but I actually think we should. We can learn so much from Elizabeth. As readers, we detect all the wit and all the sharpness in Elizabeth's language, but I think she also operates with civility in a really difficult situation. She listens. She responds to questions, presumptive claims, even accusations. She speaks with clarity, even helping her dialogue partner learn and understand. She attempts to diffuse her visitor's emotional rhetoric with language that is accurate and dignified. And let's be clear, engaging in civil discourse and participating in difficult dialogues does not mean we tolerate abuse or derisive language. Elizabeth also knows when to say when and stand up for herself and her family, especially after Lady Catherine calls the heroine an unfeeling, selfish girl and charges, do you not consider that a connection with you must disgrace Darcy in the eyes of everyone? Elizabeth has heard enough. You have insulted me in every possible method. I have nothing farther to say. You know my sentiments. And then famously concludes, I am only resolved to act in that manner which will, in my own opinion, constitute my happiness. This conversation between Lady Catherine and the heroine may not appear to end so well, and maybe it doesn't. But conversations are also often like our own educations. They continue, especially when people have the capacity to accommodate, change, and evolve. Elizabeth and Lady Catherine do not end this conversation on the best of terms, but they did hear each other. They did speak their minds. They didn't just avoid or dismiss each other. They didn't just stay within their isolated circles of friends. And Austen indicates that they're not done with each other. Love and marriage bring families together, whether we like it or not. And this inevitably initiates meaningful change. At the end of the book, we learn that Lady Catherine was extremely indignant on the marriage of her nephew and wrote a letter marked by language so very abusive, especially of Elizabeth, that for some time all the intercourse was at an end. And it's the heroine, the same obstinate, headstrong girl who previously dismissed Lady Catherine, who now persuades Darcy to overlook the offense and seek a reconciliation. And after a little further resistance on the part of his aunt, her resent gave way. Look, I'm not suggesting Austen presents this as some kind of lovely or happy family reunion. It's just not. Marriage and family are tough, but Austen reminds us that tough conversations can work, even in difficult situations, to build a semblance of civility that we so desperately need. As I was finishing my interview with Claudia Johnson, the first interview I scheduled for this larger project, she mentioned in something of an aside that Austen was always on the side of intelligence. After my former teacher completed her thought, I came back to this comment and asked, what is intelligence for Jane Austen? Excuse me. I'm going to say that again because I fear the recording didn't go well. I asked her again, what is intelligence for Jane Austen? Something's gone wrong here. What has gone wrong? You mentioned that Austen's always on the side of intelligence. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating comment, right?
Don't you agree?
Oh, I totally agree. I'm just wondering, it kind of begs the question, what's intelligence for Jane Austen?
The capacity for self-reflection, I think. I mean, it's a big question. And ultimately, I can kind of cop out by saying intelligence is the ability to think about things the way the narrator wants us to think about things. That good sense, or what Elizabeth Bennet calls the proper way of thinking. She says nobody with the proper way of thinking can imagine that Sir Collins can be a good husband. That the proper way of thinking is something that all of the novels seem to, advocate, and it might differ from novel to novel. But I think one of the things it really consists of is thinking. It's just thinking. Actually experiencing, life and thinking about it. And that's what the good characters do. And that's what the comic characters don't do.
After 25 years in academia, I have decided that the clearest indication of a smart person whom I respect, to me, is somebody who can walk into a meeting thinking one thing and walk out of a meeting thinking something else. Mm-hmm. Somebody who can actually listen,
change his mind,
think, process, and then change mind.
Yeah,
right.
It gets back to the momentous plot of Pride and Prejudice.
the momentous plot of Pride and Prejudice, indeed. Engaging in difficult or divisive conversations is tough. Listening to people who fundamentally think differently from us is tougher, and learning to change our minds may still be tougher still. Within colleges and universities, I think we all too often still evaluate intelligence in terms of test scores or grade point averages or lists of publications. We may now privilege internships and laboratory experiences or entrepreneurship or technical gadgets, but I'm rather taken by Claudia's treatment of intelligence for Austen, the ability to experience the world and keep thinking. And I don't think we should trivialize this capacity in any way. It's hard to do either or both, especially at the same time. It's much easier to remain within realms of safety, to know what we already know, and trust the communities to which we already belong. When we continue to think, we allow ourselves to ask new questions and interact and converse with new people and even change our minds. When we study academic fields like history and philosophy, we don't train for specific jobs. When our students major in French or religion, they don't do so because they want to enter a specific profession when they graduate. Contrary to what many believe, the vast majority of English majors do not become English teachers. On the contrary, academic study in the humanities prepares us for a world that has been and will continue to be fundamentally marked by change. Jane Austen shows us this versatility of thinking, the capacity to keep thinking, and the momentous ability to change one's mind amidst unsettling times. As change happens, we're going to need to work with others. We're going to need to communicate with others who think differently than us, and we're going to need to listen. In short, we're going to need some civility. As we know, and as Austen demonstrates, this is not easy. Austen offers models of civility from which we can learn as we come to terms with changes that affect us all. I want to close today by returning to the ways in which the humanities have been politicized and used by political thinkers to achieve different ends. When I traveled to India, I spoke with Dr. Mandakini Dubey, faculty member at Ashoka University, just north of Delhi. Mandakini spoke with me about the ways in which the Indian government had recognized the great potential of the humanities and the importance of Austen for investigating manipulative deployments of the humanities and their methods.
I think that Austen has such uncompromising, exquisite discrimination, and she's so precise about motivations and about people's thinking that if you actually pay attention, it's sort of the opposite of fake news. You know, it's the opposite of propaganda. It's the opposite of manipulating information, because we're always being invited to consider what is really happening in all its specificity, in all its precision. So when you start paying attention and when you start thinking in that uncompromising way about not just other people's motivations, but your own, and not just, and why is it that I want to believe this? Currently in India, there's a sort of a spread of misinformation. It's a strange time when the humanities are under some stress, and at the same time, science is under stress too. You know, at the moment where the Indian government is very happy to sort of fan the flames of ethnic hostility or religious communitarian hostility, communal hostility, by thinking about, you know, where such and such mythical king was born, and what flying instruments were invented in India in the Vedic age, and so on and so forth. So it's supposedly, on the one hand, we have this push towards science, engineering, commerce, and on the other hand, everything that's being spoken of requires an understanding of ideology, requires an understanding of I suppose, symbolic meaning, because that's what's being used so much. So it's a time when the humanities are really important and necessary, and also at the same time they're under stress. So somebody like Austen allows you, I think, a way to have conversations, for example, in the classroom, which can push back against that easy acceptance of what is told to you. Even if she's doing it at the level of personal motivations, it has implications. It makes you a better reader of text in general.
Austen's precision, as Mandakini explains, helps us to see and understand the realities, at times the harsh realities that lie beneath the distortions and inflections that, as Roland Barthes theorized, allow narratives to become naturalized as myth. As politicians, pundits, and even some academic leaders use and manipulate the methods and powers of the humanities, often announcing crises, fabricating exigent situations, or justifying extraordinary actions, Austen shows us how to read and understand situations with precision, with a clarity that demands we ask difficult questions and seek connections, that we engage the world and keep thinking, rather than rushing to invoke emergency powers or declaring perpetual crises. These are methods absolutely fundamental to the humanities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michaell. I'm going to highlight some important points for me, because your research is quite amazing and quite important as well. So I think the frequent question people usually ask me is about why study Jane Austen, right? And you talked about this, and how her writings, or I don't know how to express this, what is coming to my mind, but how accessible she is to many people or publics or countries. But I think that being a student of Claudia Johnson was a privilege for you, right? In the past. So she is also a researcher about Jane Austen, very famous books about it. And I really enjoyed also listening to Ruth Wilson. I think that I think Austen for me sometimes is escapade from reality, a kind of remedy, as she said. But if can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Of course, guys, we are going to, you can ask questions for Professor Michaell Kramp. So as soon as possible, you are going to answer on YouTube, right? But my question for today is, Elizabeth and Darcy both undergo significant transformations. To what extent are these changes driven by dialogue, and how does Austen portray the ethical stakes of listening and responding? Of course, it's a very elaborated question based on your abstract you sent me, but can you try to answer this question, this kind of transformations and the changes driven by the dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Pride and Prejudice is just a wonderful novel of conversation and dialogue, and I think so much of their characters' development, and not just Elizabeth and Darcy's wonderful, what we would think of, I think, as like a positive development, right? This sort of positive, wonderful development of theirs, in which they become these sort of more mature, more complete, more confident, and compassionate and gracious individuals, is driven by dialogue, right? But it seems to me that a key component of that, and a key component that I would want to emphasize in my own research, is their ability to listen. That their ability to hear what other people have to say. I think we make much has been made critically and historically, right, of Elizabeth's ability to read Darcy's letter, and I think that deserves all the attention it gets. I mean, all the attention that it gets. But I think equally important is simply the ability to hear and observe dialogue. And I think that's characters who can do that and really try to understand what other individuals are saying. I think that becomes very important for their ability to understand the complexity, the dynamic complexity of other individuals. And I think we develop respect for individuals when we can do that. We develop an understanding that they're more complicated, and I think that complexity becomes so important to how we are able to change ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So I think you are going. You said you're coming to Brazil. You're going to record some interviews with researchers right here, right?
That is my hope. Yeah, I'll be there in March.
Okay.
Working out an itinerary, working out a plan, and would love to meet with people. Yes.
I would like to thank you, and I hope to meet you face to face here in Brazil or in Belo Horizonte, my city. So, Michaell, I would like to ask you if you have any comments or something to say for us to finish this live.
No, I'm just very grateful for the chance to speak with you and learn with people in Brazil. Thank you so much for inviting me. Let me know how best I can answer questions. I showed my email, and if people want to contact me. Happy to sort of to speak with people about my work or promote my share my ideas.
Okay.
Yes, I'd be very excited to meet with people when I come to Brazil.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm going to say something in Portuguese, okay? So, pessoal, vocês estão convidados a enviarem suas perguntas para o professor Michaell Kramp, e assim que for possível, a gente responde para vocês. Now I'm finishing the recording, okay?
Olá, pessoal. Agora eu chamo a professora Adriana. Convido também a professora Sandra para fazer a rodada de perguntas, né? A professora Sandra tinha comentado, Adriana, depois que o vídeo terminar, nos conta um pouco mais sobre como conheceste o professor Kramp e o que mais admiras nele sobre os estudos de Austen. Seu microfone está desligado.
Ok, antes de responder, eu queria agradecer vocês pela paciência. Eu estava passando muito mal no dia dessa gravação, foi sexta-feira passada, eu estava com a voz mais rouca, e eu estava, enfim, essas desculpas aí, né, envergonhadas. Bom, tem um comentário ainda que eu preciso divulgar, que é o da Sandra, sobre a equipe de legendagem, né, a equipe de legendagem, ela fez um milagre de legendar esse vídeo de sexta-feira à noite, porque eles só conseguiram acesso à noite, porque a gente estava, né, eu estava em outro evento, eu estava numa banca, e não tinha como mandar, mas enfim. Os meninos e meninas, né, as pessoas responsáveis, na verdade, são só meninas, pelo que eu estou vendo aqui. Queremos agradecer a Alice Teixeira, Ana Luísa Rudiger, Fabiana Silva, Luana Vogel e Luísa Halbert, pelo esforço, pelo empenho, pela qualidade dessa tradução em tão pouco tempo. Hoje à noite, às 7 horas, elas estavam finalizando. Meninas, sem você, esse evento não seria possível, né, com a participação desse professor. A gente tentou gravar antes, mas não foi possível. Eu vou ocultar aqui, mas tem aquele comentário da Sandra, mas tem um outro aqui, olha. What do you say is the ideal first book to read to start the experience this literary world created by Jane Austen? Ok, eu acho que a gente podia responder, né, que qual seria o livro inicial para a gente entrar no universo austeriano, né? She the Moon, não sei, Neil, né, que é o nome dessa pessoa. Deixa eu ver se tem mais algum outro comentário. Tem comentário sobre a qualidade.
Tem muitos elogios, né?
Muitos elogios. Rosângela Neres aqui, congratulations on your efforts in translation and subtitles. Jane também aí, parabenizando toda essa equipe maravilhosa. E, gente, a pergunta aqui inicial eu vou responder o da Sandra, né, que aliás, ela falou lá atrás, eu me perdi. Desculpa, gente, nós estamos desde 6h45 ligadas aqui no 220. A Sandra falou sobre o trabalho, o que eu acho do trabalho do professor Michaell Kramp. Bom, eu conheci o Michaell Kramp por intermédio da Maria Clara Biagioli, não sei se ela ainda está aqui conosco. Ela conheceu o professor nos Estados Unidos e conversou sobre esse projeto. Ele também já entrevistou a Maria Clara, já gravou, e a Maria Clara me indicou porque também eu trabalho com todas essas questões de recepção de Jane Austen, né, a questão de cultura de fãs, e ele vai entrevistar outras pessoas aqui também no Brasil, não sei exatamente qual cidade, a gente vai ter que ir, ou se ele virar para Minas, mas ainda vamos ver lá para março. Bom, o professor, ele faz um trabalho muito interessante, que é essa questão das humanities, né, das humanas aí, porque, ao que parece, aqui no Brasil também tem essa tendência de uma desvalorização das humanas em relação a considerar-se ciência, né, a ciência linguística, e até a questão da discussão literária, ela se perde, fica parecendo que é menor. Não sei se vocês têm essa impressão, mas eu queria indicar para vocês aqui, eu vou procurar aqui, enquanto a gente está respondendo outra coisa, o podcast do professor, e ele fala nessa tranquilidade toda, e aí fica muito bom para a gente ouvir, relaxar mais à noite. Eu acho que o professor, ele traz uma visão diferenciada, que é fora de um contexto, né, da América do Sul, do Brasil, falante de português, e é um homem pesquisador que a gente, né, viu aqui nas apresentações de hoje, de terça e quarta, poucos são os homens ainda que apresentam trabalhos aqui no Brasil. Vitor, brilhante, com a sua pesquisa sobre o discurso indireto livre, mas a grande porcentagem de pessoas que pesquisam Austen no Brasil ainda são mulheres. Então, acho que cada um desses homens que estão construindo, né, o seu discurso acadêmico, pesquisando mulheres, eles têm a nossa, como é que fala assim, por favor, façam mais e continuem, né, fazendo sempre, tem o nosso elogio. Eu vou entrar aqui para a pergunta que é, qual que seria o livro ideal para começar a ler, para entrar nesse universo austeniano? Bom, eu sugiro Orgulho e Preconceito, porque a fórmula de Orgulho e Preconceito, ela é infalível, mas se você quer apaixonar pela Jane Austen mais crítica e que tem um discurso mais maduro, eu sugiro Persuasão, né? Eu acho que vai depender um pouco da faixa etária, inclusive, para quem eu vou indicar esses livros, mas aí fica a sugestão. E você, Marcela?
Eu sou suspeita, eu escolheria Orgulho e Preconceito.
Uhum.
É o meu favorito, não tem como.
Está aqui, no seu livro. Bom, eu queria saber se vocês têm mais alguma pergunta. Sandra vai entrar, e obrigada, Sandra.
A gente tem um comentário aqui, ó. A desvalorização das humanas aqui é tanta que os cursos não faziam parte do Ciências Sem Fronteiras quando existia o programa.
Isso, a Thalita, né? Isso, Thalita. A gente vê também os congressos, eu vou dar um exemplo assim, clássico de comparação. Congresso de economia, por exemplo, são congressos badalaladíssimos, com aquelas bolsas em hotéis e programação efervescente, e a gente está fazendo isso, né? Trabalho de formiguinha, né, Sandra? Eu vejo os nossos colegas da USP, a Maria Clara lá na Alfenas, né, na Universidade Federal de Alfenas, os nossos amigos da UERJ, que pesquisam Austen, Virginia Woolf, em Brasília aí, né, Marcela, com sua orientação do meu amigo, também da UF, representada pelo professor Vitor. Eu não posso falar tantas assim, porque senão acho que todas as universidades estão empenhadas em fazer a manutenção das humanas. Eu acredito que a gente consegue vencer porque o discurso, ele faz parte, é inerente do ser humano, né? E aí ele não se perde em questão de valorização. Thalita é daqui de BH, né? Uma luta de congressos em que ela estudava na UFMG é muito difícil, mas eu estou vendo esse renascimento, sabe? Eu não sei como é que vai ser, como é que né, que a gente vai avançar isso, mas eu acho que a gente está fazendo, cada um contribuindo aqui, todos esses pesquisadores que passaram hoje irão, né, participar com a gente amanhã e depois, cada um faz a sua parte na sua respectiva instituição. Você, Sandra, qual que é a sua experiência aí?
Pois é, nós tivemos uma reunião essa semana sobre isso aqui no Instituto de Letras, no setor de inglês. Nós estamos num processo de reformulação do currículo de licenciatura. E a gente tomou muito cuidado, o grupo da literatura se reuniu e nós tivemos muito cuidado, porque existem várias universidades no Brasil nas quais as disciplinas de literatura estão diminuindo, né? Estão sendo retiradas para coisas mais da área da tecnologia e coisas assim. E veio agora uma imposição de Brasília de que nas licenciaturas a carga horária tem que subir cerca de 530 horas. Então, nós saímos correndo e tem que ser na área das disciplinas de didática, o estágio tem que começar a partir do primeiro semestre, claro que não é um estágio em sala de aula ainda, mas nós nos apropriamos desse problema, porque os nossos alunos só começam a fazer as disciplinas de literatura de língua inglesa a partir de metade do curso, quando eles atingiram um nível de proficiência. Aí o curso está quase terminando, eles já estão engajados com outras pesquisas e todas as disciplinas têm que ser cursadas ao mesmo tempo, que dá uma carga de leitura muito grande. Então, nós resolvemos ocupar com disciplinas de ensino de literatura toda a primeira metade do curso deles, né? Sim. E também as disciplinas de extensão, curricularização da extensão, a gente vai trazer para o programa, oferecendo coisas de literatura introdutória. Então, se a gente não está sempre atento e lutando contra, é perigoso. A gente está num momento perigoso, em que até mesmo dentro das humanas, pensar não está sendo muito valorizado.
Exato.
Acho que eu fui muito negativa agora no que eu estou falando, mas a gente tem que ter cautela.
Está sendo realista.
E a gente tem que ir com cuidado.
Você está sendo realista. Eu vou falar da minha experiência também no ensino médio, como avaliadora de material didático publicado, né, pelo MEC. Os livros de inglês sofreram um corte horrível, né? Os livros de inglês tinham mais ou menos uma coleção de primeiro, segundo e terceiros anos, tinha 600 páginas, 200 cada série, e dentro dessas séries tinha sempre um momento de literatura, e hoje não tem mais, foi cortado. Eu vou ter que falar porque eu tenho que dar nome aos bois. O governo anterior, ele cortou cerca de 200 páginas da coleção de ensino médio de inglês, então, portanto, os meus alunos e os alunos de vocês, ou os alunos que recebem o material do MEC, eles ficaram, né, espero que os novos modelos sejam diferentes, os novos livros do PNLD, ficaram com menos 1/3 de conteúdo. Então, aí foi uma revolução que a gente tentou fazer no Cefet, que foi não adotar livro didático nessas condições, já que 1/3, os nossos alunos vão ficar com 1/3 do conteúdo a menos, já é pouco, né, o inglês. Então, a área de humanas a gente decidiu não adotar, né, só o de língua portuguesa, que já estava com uma coleção bacana. Mas não tem o momento literatura nesses livros mais. Então, é aquela situação. O que a gente está fazendo é o que hoje mais cedo me perguntaram, como introduzir Jane Austen no ensino médio, por meio dos graded readers, que é essa literatura graduada, por nível de proficiência.
Muito bom, né? Muito bom.
E na graduação vou falar do desafio, Luciene está aqui comigo, que é minha aluna, e ela está aqui nos bastidores, né? Para colocar escritoras inglesas neste semestre, eu criei uma disciplina na linguística chamada Léxico de Escritoras Inglesas do século XIX.
Tem que entrar nesses buracos aí.
Pegando tecnologia, né? Sabe, assim, alguma coisa desse tipo. Então, estava analisando o léxico dos textos dessas escritoras para poder...
Literatura linguística aplicada, ela vai se infiltrando que nem água, a gente tem que entrar em tudo. Aí, apareceu aqui embaixo um comentário da Fábio dizendo que ela já achava a carga horária de licenciatura grande, agora vai subir mais tudo isso. Cada vez que tem um problema, eles não sabem como resolver o problema, eles aumentam a carga horária. Eu não sei aí como é que vocês estão, mas aqui as aulas estão indo praticamente até o Natal, comecinho do ano já recomeça, o pessoal está todo exausto. No caso dos professores, eu acho que era só uma questão de valorizar um pouco mais, triplicar o salário, e aí, em vez de trabalhar em 4 escolas, o professor poderia trabalhar em 1 ou 2, e aí poderia se concentrar melhor, né? Mas tem que ter vontade política para essas coisas acontecerem.
e tem que ter também um movimento que não é só político, no sentido de partidos e de Estado, município e governo federal, que é a população também dá o devido valor às humanas, né? Quando fala assim, meu filho está fazendo humanas, e vai ser professor, e não necessariamente...
Mas é o contrário, né? Inclusive, nem é só nas humanas, a profissão de professor está muito desrespeitada, muito desvalorizada. E não é por acaso, é o produto de muito trabalho que vem sendo feito há bastante tempo para que isso aconteça. Por algum motivo, tem uma implicância com relação à pesquisa, conhecimento, pensamento. Não sei nem se não tem a ver com a inteligência artificial, se eles já desistiram que o ser humano pense, todo mundo vai entrar no esquema tal do...
Então, eu acho que tem essa relação com a facilidade, né? Muito mais fácil você pedir a inteligência artificial para fazer um resumo, para traduzir, do que você vai aprender, passar todos os anos na escola.
Eles já te dão o que tu tem que achar sobre tal personagem e pronto.
Isso. Eu vi numa ótica aqui em Belo Horizonte um óculos da Ray-Ban por 3.800, ele já tem a câmera aqui da inteligência artificial.
Enxerga então, por ti, pensa por ti, tu não precisa mais usar a cabeça.
A questão é o seguinte, é o que eu falo com os meus alunos. O óculos, ele está aqui, ele pode te ajudar na tradução, mas tem uma coisa que ninguém vai roubar de você, que esse óculos, né, da inteligência artificial pode quebrar, pode ser roubado. É o que está aqui dentro. O que for depositado na cabeça da gente, ninguém consegue roubar. Mas eu acho que é uma mudança de paradigma que a gente tem que passar, né? E eu não sei se a nossa geração consegue presenciar isso, sabe, Sandra? Não sei como é que vai ser, mas vamos voltar a um tom mais, como é que eu posso dizer, mais positivista, porque a Jane Austen, ela escreveu sobre circunstâncias muito difíceis, ela publicou, né, praticamente ela se financiou na publicação dos livros dela, e hoje, a gente, mais de 200 anos, a gente está aqui discutindo essa literatura prazerosa. Então, assim, existe, sim. Eu acho que a gente pode estar vivendo um momento muito desagradável, que é esse momento instável, né? Não sei, eu acho que eu passei uma adolescência muito rica em literatura, pegando livros na biblioteca pública, depois na graduação, né, consequência da minha graduação em letras, eu vivia de livros, mas eu acho que é uma coisa que começa também dentro de casa, né? Meu irmão assinava o Círculo do Livro, e eu tive acesso a algumas belezuras ali, porque, né, eu acho que contei para você, não foi, Sandra? Que eu brincava, que eu etiquetava a lombada dos livros, não sabia nem o que era aquela numeração, mas eu inventava
Quase que ela foi para a biblioteconomia.
Exatamente. E tem toda essa conexão com os livros, mas eu acho que é isso, esse retorno, né? A gente retorna tanta coisa ruim, por que a gente não retorna essa coisa boa, prazerosa, que são os círculos de leitura, a valorização, inclusive, de professores, não só porque a gente é professor, né? Quem está aqui nesse estúdio, nós todas somos professoras, mas é porque isso tem que ter um resgate, né, dessa função para a sociedade, que ela é essencial para tudo. E eu não sei, a gente está deixando ser relevado, como você diz, pela inteligência artificial. Ela não pode fazer tudo, ela não substitui tudo, enfim. Viva a Jane Austen, gente, vamos respirar.
A gente se diverte muito e é muito bom.
Ela não só escreveu financiando seus livros na dificuldade, mas escreveu à mão, né? Numa mesinha pequenininha.
Nem esferográfica ela tinha.
Exato.
Então, escondida, né? Ouvindo ali a porta, se alguém chegando, parava.
Eu acho que é o desafio, né? Que a gente tem diariamente, e ela passou em uma situação muito... Se a gente acha que está ruim, imagina para ela. Né? Imagina fazer edição de livros, ela marcava com alfinetes também a edição dos livros, né? As correções. Bom, é um desafio que a gente tem que enfrentar, mas quando o professor Michaell Kramp ele traz essa palestra sobre a questão das humanas, eu acho que é um alerta, porque não é só aqui. Não é? Essa crise não é vivida só por nós professores. Eu conheço professores norte-americanos que passam dificuldades para ir para congresso, para poder fazer, né, para fazer a coisa acontecer, a pesquisa acontecer de fato, né? Eu não estou falando de um pesquisador de Harvard, mas professores das universidades estaduais norte-americanas, eles passam por dificuldades muito parecidas com as que a gente passa aqui no Brasil. Bom, queridos, Nós passamos 30 minutos. Eu agradeço imensamente todos vocês que ficaram aqui nessa live. Eu agradeço toda a participação de quem está nos bastidores, Débora, Marcela, Fabiane, Luciene, Fabiana, perdão, a Sandra, porque, né, nós estamos aqui. Eu sei que você acordou 5 horas da manhã, que você mandou mensagem para mim, então eu queria que vocês se resguardassem, né, preservassem a voz, porque amanhã tem mais, e daqui a pouco, aliás, né, na outra parte do globo, Jane Austen já é 250.
Amanhã é o grande dia, né?
Parabéns,
E se alguém tiver uma pergunta para o professor Michaell específica, pode mandar para a gente, que a gente encaminha para ele, né?
O próprio chat, né? Eu combinei com ele de deixar no chat lá do YouTube, para quem está nos assistindo, que aí a gente vai responder à medida do possível. E eu vou deixar lá também no YouTube o link do podcast, que eu não consegui achar aqui agora. Bom, nós vamos encerrar então a transmissão, Marcela.
Vamos.
Até daqui a pouquinho. Até amanhã às 9.
Gente.
Tchau.
Obrigada pela paciência, pelo atraso, né? E agradecendo novamente a nossa equipe, que fez um brilhante trabalho na tradução. Obrigada pela presença de todos e amanhã
a equipe
tem
de
mais.
estúdio também, muito valiosa. Muito obrigada por tudo.
Obrigada, boa noite.